What's up guys, Justin here with the renderingessentials.com. So Lumion 2023 is here and it's bringing with it one of the features we've been waiting for a long time, ray tracing. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. All right, so there are multiple different pages that talk a little bit more about Lumion 2023. So there's kind of a feature highlight page as well as the more detailed release notes. I will link to both of those in the notes down below, but I thought we could hit on some of the bigger things that have been changed in this version. Okay, so the first thing we have to talk about inside of Lumion 2023 is the new ray tracing. So this is something that people have been asking for a while. And so ray tracing is basically a rendering method where Lumion actually calculates the way that light behaves. So it actually calculates the light bounces, other things like that. So you've seen it in a ton of other programs where you click on the button and it kind of like, it sits there and it renders, right? And it does calculations. So it's less real time, but it's also much more accurate. And you can kind of see the difference between the rasterization, which is the real-time version, and the ray traced version by dragging this slider on the release notes page right here. So notice how you are seeing more light bouncing, other things like that. This is something that people have been waiting for a long time. I'm excited to see this inside of the new version of Lumion. Unfortunately, I can't actually demonstrate this for you. So the reason that I can't demonstrate this for you is the new ray tracing does require that you have an RT capable graphics card. That means you're going to need a graphics card that actually has hardware accelerated ray tracing built in, which I currently do not. I'm using an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1080 Ti, which is a great graphics card. It is a little bit older and it doesn't actually have this built in. So you are going to want to check this list to make sure that your computer actually meets these requirements in order to do the hardware accelerated ray tracing. Now, note that you can use the regular rasterized rendering in Lumion, not a problem without these graphics cards, but the actual ray tracing itself is going to require one of these cards in order for that to work. And so I am currently trying to figure out how to get my computer upgraded. I don't know if that's going to be a new machine or if that's just going to be a new graphics card for the short term, but as soon as I get that, I will demo out this feature. So for those of you that are curious, and this is one of the new example scenes that comes with Lumion, if you jump over into photo mode, ray tracing is a new effect that you add on top of your photo mode. If you have a GPU that doesn't support ray tracing, then it's going to look something like this, and it's going to give you a message that says your GPU does not support ray tracing. Now notice how, and I'm going to adjust the focal length on this because it's way too wide, but notice how I can still click in here and use the regular raster rendering, and that works fine. Right? So if I click on this and use the raster rendering, the image looks just fine, but any of those ray tracing images, so like these over here are all ray traced images. If I click on it, notice how it's just going to have this ray tracing grayed out, and it's going to render as if it was just a regular rendering in Lumion. Okay, one other thing to be aware of is there are also some technical limitations when it comes to the ray tracing. Specifically, the one that most people are focused on is the glass and water materials haven't been converted to the ray traced engine. So that means that the glass and the water materials aren't fully working inside of the ray traced engine at the moment. The glass in particular for me is a little bit of a head scratcher because glass is really important when it comes to ray tracing. So this is something that's going to get fixed, but it's currently not working. So just be aware of that when you try to use the ray tracing in Lumion. So in addition, ray tracing will disable some of these other effects because these effects are things that are used in order to get the rasterization to better simulate lighting. So when you enable ray tracing, it's going to disable your global illumination, hyperlight, reflection, skylight, and shadow. So just be aware of that. That's not at all surprising, but those are supposed to be disabled when you have ray tracing enabled. Okay, so next up, and another great addition is they have converted the material workflow to fully PBR. So what that means is that now we can actually load in 8 maps, allowing you to do different things. So previously you had a fair amount less map options, but let's jump over into Lumion and take a look at this. So notice how the interface looks a little bit different. It's been redesigned in the sense that the icons and things look a little bit different, but we can jump over to the materials section and we can click on a material in order to edit it. So if I click on these materials right here, that's going to pop up the material editor. Notice how this looks different than it did before. And specifically what we want to do is we want to create our own new material. So we're going to click on new material right here. We're going to click on standard. And so we can double click on that and that's going to pop up some options for us. So now you've got all these different maps that you can load in here. And you can do that just by clicking on this button right here. And so let's say we wanted to bring in one of these brick walls. What we would do is we would just load in these maps, right? So we would load in the diffuse in the texture slot. Notice how you can adjust the size by clicking and dragging right here, but then you can load in things like your normal maps. Your normal map's going to go in your relief, your roughness. You can load in the roughness map right here. Your displacement can go in the displacement map. And so once we get these maps loaded in here, notice how we can use the slider in order to adjust the effects, right? So the displacement here, you're seeing that in and out. You're using that displacement map just like this. So we do have more of a full PBR workflow inside of Lumion right now, which I'm really happy to see. And so going along with this, we do have some new slots. So for example, the Metalness has its own slider. And so they've broken out the emissive strength, reflectivity, and opacity into their own lines, meaning you can control them individually, which is a great new feature because it gives you more control of the materials inside of Lumion. They also have a new subsurface scattering effect, which gives you the ability to do this translucent look right here. So that'll make materials a little bit more translucent as opposed to solid looking, as well as the ability to add a clear coat to your objects. The clear coat is going to give you almost this this finish that looks like this is like varnished or something like that. Notice how you get a lot more reflection coming off of these using that clear coat value. So in the glass settings, they've merged the pure glass and the standard glass, which I think is great because I think a lot of people didn't really understand the difference. So now if you jump in here and you adjust glass, right, you've got a bunch of different types in here. So if you get into your materials and you select glass, they've kind of broken them out into these different kinds, right? You've got your rough glass, you've got your architectural glass, but none of these are really listed as pure glass anymore. They're just kind of in here as glass, which I think is a good change because, like I said, pure glass versus not pure glass is just kind of confusing. I just always assumed that pure glass was better, and I always use that. Is the way that I used to do that. So they've also added a new transform gizmo. So let's say we were to place something like this chair right here, and then we wanted to adjust it. Notice how now we've got the ability to select these different directions right here in order to move them on the X, Y, Z. You can move them along one axis, you can move them along multiple different axes like this, but notice how now instead of having to mess around with these orientation buttons, if you want to, you can come click and just kind of make adjustments like this, which is definitely a time saver. It's definitely a little bit more, standard for what you would expect in the industry. So definitely a usability upgrade, but I think using the new transform gizmo is pretty easy. It's pretty self-explanatory for things around in most 3D software or rendering software. I think it's going to make a lot of sense to you. So they've also added a new auto snap feature, which you can see how this is enabled with this auto snapping button right here. But what this is going to do is this is going to take objects, it's going to automatically snap to them and align to them. So you can see how, like, for example, if I move this chair against this wall, it's aligning to this wall instead of going halfway through the wall or something like that. You can also come in here and click and drag the little button right here. And when you do that, notice how that auto snapping is going to work when you do that as well. So auto snapping is definitely going to be a time saver because placing and aligning objects in Lumion hasn't always been the easiest just with the tools that are in here, but this is super fast and super snappy. And so in addition, for the snapping, any of the models that have the seated tag, so notice how if I mouse over this, it has that tag for seated. If I click on that, the seated people are going to snap to the chairs that we have in here. So it actually sits them in the chairs just like that. And so that's a really cool feature, being able to quickly place people in chairs like that, and being able to do it across multiple different models like this. So that one's definitely a fun one. And so objects have searchable tags now as well. So like, for example, we were just talking about the seated. Well, if I type in here and I search for the seated tag, all of the seeded models are going to show up in here. If you want to see what was added in Lumion 2023, you can type in L23, and everything that's in that section that was added, you can now see in here. So let's go over to our objects real quick. We type in L23, that's going to find everything that has the tag L23, and it's going to show it. So you can see all of the new stuff. You can search for all of the different seating or office seating or anything like that. So like office chair, for example, you could search for office chair and it's going to show all of the office chairs that are in the library. So interestingly, you can also add a negative in front of a tag and it will exclude all of those tags. So for example, if you didn't want to see the Lumion 2023 items, you could type in -23 and it would show everything that doesn't have that L23 tag associated with it. And so we did talk about this a little bit before, but they did redesign the interface in material mode. So they went to more of a tab based workflow, which I think again just makes the program look a little bit more professional. So now the things having to do with your materials are in different tabs, right? So they kind of merged some different categories in order to make this a little more streamlined. So they merged things by categories in order to make things look a little bit more streamlined. I do think it looks better. I think it looks a little bit less cluttered, but things are still in there, but they've just been kind of like redesigned from a UI standpoint in order to be a little bit more usable. All right, so in animation mode, we've got some new camera path presets. So what the camera path presets are going to do is they're going to bring in preset movements for your animation. So like for example, if you have an object and you want to orbit around it, you can create an animation around that object. So let's say that we were to add, let's add something that isn't a chair. So let's say we were to add a table like this one. If we jump over into movie mode, we can select those animation paths. So I'm gonna click over here and notice how I have the option to add a camera preset path. So if I click on this, what this is gonna do is this is going to add that orbit movement like this. And then you can take that orbit movement and you can move it. And notice how the new gizmo shows up in here as well. But you can take that new orbit movement and you can align it with your object. So I'm gonna move this over here. Maybe give myself a bit wider focal length here, but you can adjust the radius of this orbit. So for example, let's say I wanted to bring this in closer, I could bring this in to like 2.5 or something like that. You can also adjust the height, but then when you're done, notice how you can set the angle in here like this. So if you wanted to do like a 360, you can use this in order to do that. But now if I was to click on play, notice what's going to happen is the camera is going to orbit around this location right here. And so if we want to see it, we can click on the switch to the on path camera view right here, but this is going to show us what that camera is going to do. And then we could kind of toggle back over here. We could adjust things like the height. So maybe we could adjust this up to like 1.25 and then jump back in here like this. So we can kind of preview that and make adjustments to the path, that kind of thing. And so if you go into the advanced tab, there's more things you can adjust, like for example, the number of revolutions that you have in here. So if you wanted this to go around maybe like twice, you could type in 2 and notice what it's doing is it's adding more revolutions in here. So you've got a couple different preset camera types, so you can do a pan tilt or a dolly shot or a follow object shot in here as well. I've not had a chance to test this one, but you can also import camera paths from an external program from FBX or DAE formats in order to bring that in here. Now that is something I have not tested, so it looks like they're showing a Blender camera right here. So it looks like you could import a Blender camera movement that's in here. So if you do have a camera movement that you've exported from an external program, you can use that in Lumion. And so there are some other settings that you can adjust having to do with the aspect ratio of your camera. So you can use the drop down in order to select the format. You can also flip your aspect ratio. So if you're changing your camera aspect ratio, notice how there are some available presets in here that you can use. And so they've improved the performance inside of build mode, at least according to this. I can't test this because I think this is something that's using that RTX technology in order to do that. I don't have one of those cards, so I can't tell you if it's working or not, but at least the claim is that both the performance and the quality can be better even with lower resolution. All right, so they're also noting that they have this master effects list, which should be able to apply a series of effects across the entire set. I think I might be doing this one wrong. So when I go in here and I look at this, right, if I click between different scenes, like this, they all have their individual effects applied to them. The master effects list is over here, and if I click on this, this is going to show master effects, right, which I think is effects that are applied to multiple different styles, like this. So like, for example, Real Skies is across multiples of these. I thought that you should be able to come in here and make an adjustment to adjust like the brightness and the heading and things like that, and it would be applied to all of these. It's not doing that. I think that I am missing something here, but I'm not sure what it is, because if I click on Master Effects List, notice how it's not applying that same background to this scene right here, or the same Real Sky effect. So I'm a little bit confused as to how this Master Effects List actually works. I could definitely see that being really valuable, being able to apply this across multiple different scenes, but I'm not 100% sure how that one works. So there have been a number of new models added to the library. So like, for example, they've added 100 new characters. They've added a bunch of fine detail nature as well as other objects in here as well. So adding library objects is always helpful. Lumion's always had a deep library of objects inside of it. So having additional objects as well as materials added in here definitely makes this an attractive choice if you're looking for something that has a lot of built-in assets. So they've also made some changes to their effects. So like, for example, they've improved the color correction effect and added a histogram right here. So you can see clipped highlights and shadows, other things like that. So from a lighting standpoint, they've come in here and they've adjusted the brightness value for the spotlights and the omni lights to reflect lumens. So actual real world units instead of something kind of arbitrary. So that's definitely helpful if you're trying to match something in the real world. And then the area lights and line lights have been converted to nits. So again, just a real world unit in there instead of an arbitrary unit. So you might have noticed that the user interface does look different. The reason the user interface looks different is because they've kind of applied this darker tone across everything, so everything looks more unified right now. The UI definitely looks different in here. It's not massively different, but it definitely has a cleaner look and appearance in here. So it looks a little bit more professional, I guess would be my take. So I think that has been a good improvement, but I think if you have been using Lumion before, you're not going to have any problems figuring out how this works. So we've also got some new context menus in here that allow you to do things like copy pasting materials, other things like this. So again, I don't think it's going to be especially difficult to figure out. So it's just a slightly different way to use some of the tools inside of Lumion. And then there have also been a ton of like workflow changes and improvements. So things that just kind of change the way that you interact in here. You can see all of those by going into the release notes section right here. So you can kind of scroll down here. One that I found kind of interesting is they do have support for animated MP4 textures as opacity maps. So that's an interesting one for me. I'm just looking at the way they brought this kind of like cat in here. So being able to bring in the cat and then use the opacity map so that you can place this. I assume this is a 2D like billboard or something like that. That's definitely interesting to me. I'd love to see more about how that could work and some different applications for that. So we do have a number of templates that are new. It looks like we've got more options for different, I guess I'd call them biomes, but you've got desert, you've got forest, you've got beach, you've got snowy, so a bunch of different templates that are in here. And so one other thing I will point out is from a pricing standpoint, it looks like they've rolled this over to a subscription model, but the subscription model is a yearly subscription, right? They list it out as a monthly cost, like this, but you're billed yearly. So you can see that in here that you're billed first year up front. So it's not a monthly cost anymore, it's a yearly cost. And you can toggle between the 1 year and the 3 year in here. But when we look at the subscription standpoint, this hasn't gone to a monthly as much as just a lump sum that just recurs every year. So that is subscription pricing, but it doesn't give you like monthly access. So depending on what your situation is, that might be good for you, that might not be good for you, but that's currently what they're offering from a pricing standpoint. And then one final note is just note that you can't open Lumion 2023 files in the older version. I'm sure there's a number of different reasons for that, but they are recommending that any projects you started in old versions, you finish them in that version and then start new projects in Lumion 2023. As far as I know, they are not reverse compatible. So just be careful with that. If you upgrade a file, then I don't think you're going to be able to open it in the older version anymore. All right, so leave a comment below. Let me know what you think about this new version. I'm probably most excited about the ray tracing, but I'm going to have to upgrade my machine to actually be able to use it. So probably should be a video in the future talking about that, but I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. What do you think about the new version? I just love having that conversation with you guys. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.